My name is Pascal Burezou, if you don't know already, and I'm a historian, specialist of medieval Islam, and more specifically of the Almohad, the Berber empires, the Almohad Maghreb. For now, I'm director of ISP, the French Institute for the Studies of Islam and Muslim Societies, co-organizer with NISIS, Marbourg, CSIC of these spring schools. And I'm very happy to welcome you for the third session on worship in space. And we will listen first to Araceli González Vázquez, que es una who is a tenured researcher in the CSIC, Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas, after a postdoctorate in the Laboratoire d'Anthropologie Sociale du Collège de France, y que es una socio-anthropologist, also maybe a thought anthropologist, working on the Sufism, on relation between humans and non-humans, I mean humans, animals, humans and spirits. And her field of studies is Morocco, Ceuta, and Maghreb, generally speaking. And today, she is eager to talk about what? How do the others dwell, Islam, non-human beings, and special relations in Morocco? Please, Tenured.
Thank you, Pascal, for this very kind presentation. And I also want to thank my colleagues at the organization of the Tirana Spring School 2018 for having offered me the opportunity of giving you this keynote. And let me make a brief comment on the picture that you see there on the water cellar of a small village in the Jebel Mountains in the north of Morocco, and the sound of his bell. For some people in the market, in the daily market on Tuesdays, this bell exactly would locate, when hearing it, where the water cellar might be in the market. But for other neighbors of the village in which I did fieldwork in 2007, this bell might also indicate where the jnûn, among other places in the market, and certainly the slaughterhouse would be one, where the jnûn might be also wandering, near the water of the water cellar. So this is a very different approach to the sound of the bell of the water cellar. As I have stated in the abstract, my talk today aims at exploring the spatial relations between humans and non-humans in Morocco, human and non-human beings, and drawing from my own ethnographic fieldwork among the Jbala and the Romara of northern Morocco, I would like to examine the local understandings of the topological means of being related, and I would also like to reflect on the spaces where interspecific relations take place. But also I will draw on some ethnographic materials provided by one Finnish sociologist, well known because he was the mentor of Bronislaw Malinowski, Edward Westermarck. I am referring to Edward Westermarck, who did fieldwork in Morocco at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. And he provided us with very, very interesting ethnographic materials in the north of Morocco and of many other parts of the country. And also I have to say that, this is the area where I do fieldwork, in the Ghazawa tribe, in the Western Reef. You can see the city of Chefchaouen. So this is all the north of Morocco. I have tried to identify every tribe and most of the important cities in the north. Well, this is just to show you one of the villages in which I did fieldwork, and I normally do fieldwork. And this is Edward Westermarck. So I would do what I said, basically having two questions in mind. So how do the others dwell, and how do non-human beings, and I will take the example of the jnûn today, how do non-human beings dwell? Well, according to Finnish sociologist Edward Westermarck, who, as I told you, was assisted by a northern Moroccan Sharif, Abdeslam al-Baghali, the jnûn are said to dwell in specific locations, particularly by mastering a space. And I will later refer to what Moroccans might mean, or Jubalan or Romarans or other Moroccans might mean, with this mastery of a space. Westermarck and other anthropologists who have carried out ethnographic fieldwork in Morocco from the early 20th century to date, and myself included, we refer to spaces with current or stagnant waters, such as the seas, rivers, lakes, fountains, wells, wetlands, and public baths. Different scale subterranean spaces, such as holes and caves. And interestingly, as explained by Simon Omiara, there is a very fruitful discussion regarding the aerial or the subterranean nature of the jnûn as transmitted in the Quran and in other texts. Also, ruins of human buildings, and such as abandoned houses and mosques, and definitely haunted houses are one of the most important places where the jnûn are said to be found. Places where human or animal blood is spilled, such as slaughterhouses or markets, but also the rooms or the places where female humans and animals give birth, because blood is spilled, and the jnûn are fond of blood. Spaces where dead humans or animals are buried, such as cemeteries and pits. And the jnûn are also said to dwell in the bodies of human and non-human beings, also by mastering them. And any of the aforementioned spaces, including the bodies of humans and non-humans alike, can be considered to be inhabited, and this is expressed in Moroccan Arabic in singular with the word meshkoun or meshkounin, and mastered, memlouk or memloukin, by the jnûn. As you can notice, one of the terms is a very transparent spatial metaphor, while the other refers to domination and authority and transcends the simple expression of a relationship of property or ownership. And as I will try to show you, mastery is really central to understanding local cosmologies and local ontologies. Well, I just wanted to, in order not to be bored, show you some of the places which might be said to be inhabited by or mastered by the jnûn. No? This is an ancient Spanish or Portuguese fort in Larache. This is the Odo River in the Western Reef, especially in this thick course of wide course of water. Peoples of the area would say that the jnûn inhabit. The cemetery of the city of Tetuan, also considered to be an inhabited place by the jnûn. Domestic animals, which in the Jbala normally would be among those animals inhabited by the jnûn. And later I will say something about the domestic and non-domestic animals, the wild animals. Because goats, normally women are really in close contact with goats, and goats are also animals who very frequently are said to be mastered by jnûn. And also, with this picture, I wanted to show you that sometimes a very prophylactic attributes are really attributed, sorry for the repetition, to the red color used in the pottery by the pottery makers in order to keep the jnûn away from water containers. And these are water containers made by the women modeling pottery. And this is another interesting thing which refers to material culture in the region, because still women do model pottery here. Well, go backwards. Well, both social and cultural theory has not long ago taken a so-called spatial turn, and sometimes using very, very precise concepts and metaphors to think about the complexities of the world and the politics of worldling. And with this term, worldling, as other anthropologists do, I refer to the experience of being in something and being in the world, but also being within and being with, being topologically related. Despite frequent reference to this spatial term, the first volume, which is recognized to explicitly address how theory and practice concerning space was used in a variety of fields from very diverse conceptual perspectives, was a reader entitled The Spatial Turn, Interdisciplinary Perspectives, edited by Barney Worf and Santa Arias in 2008. You probably know this very well. Interestingly, in 1999, historian Dennis Cosgrove had already stressed that the spatial turn across both arts and sciences corresponded to, I quote, post-structuralist agnosticism about both naturalistic and universal explanations, end of quote. And this statement clearly resonates with some of my current research on interspecific relations in Morocco, particularly with my re-examination of the relations between humans and non-humans. And taking into account some recent proposals within the so-called ontological term, what I aim is, I aim at exploring multi-specific or interspecific relationalities. And a way of doing it is focusing on the human local understandings of these human beings referred to as jnûn. But as I told you, I try to focus on a myriad of beings, not just evidently on the jnûn, because relations between humans and non-humans are really far more complex. From 2008 onwards, many works in the fields of anthropology, history, or sociology have become increasingly spatial in their orientation. And the views of space within these disciplines, of course, are far from being homogeneous. As you will be able to perceive in this spring school, and you are already doing it at the moment, there is an enormous diversity in how scholars of different disciplines working from slightly or widely intellectual traditions and relying on varying assumptions about theory and methodology, ontology and epistemology, approach the significance of the spatial. As stressed by Santa Arias himself in 2010, the spatial turn speaks with more than one voice. And moreover, one might well question, in my opinion, however, the actual novelty in those days of the spatial dimension, which might be the field of social sciences and humanities research, one of these lost and founds recovered then and now again. Anyway, the spatial turn in the social sciences and the humanities, or research focusing on space and place and dwelling, as we have expressed in the title of this spring school, has achieved a very interesting reintroduction of the material dimensions of the anthropological inquiry, which certainly might compensate for a very, very problematic neglect of the physicality of the worlds in which we live in. I hope that today I can make you think of a broadly common realm of thoughts and practices linked to spaces and places, which the literature available today on Morocco and other Islamic societies has really neglected to address. But I am going to show you some very interesting books. I already talked with some people about Spirits of Palestine by Felia Rodenberg. Of course, the Amir al-Said Word of the Jinn is a very interesting book also about these human beings. And referring to Morocco, the monograph of Mohamed Maarouf about jinn eviction in the sanctuary of Ben Jafou. It's certainly a really very valuable reading on these topics of research. Well, as you probably all know, thought and practice related to the existence of the jnûn and the mastery or possession of the human or animal by the jnûn occurs throughout many different Islamic societies in many significant ways. Various spatial theories have also been evolved to interpret the belief in the jnûn among the ancient Arabs, for example, and Islamic societies and communities all around the world. One of the main theories is classical animism. It assumes a more or less linear evolution from a sort of polydemonism, the existence of many malevolent human beings, which would be represented in the belief, by the belief in the jnûn, to then polytheism and monotheism. And one of the first researchers to link animism and Islamic discourses on the jnûn is the North American missionary Samuel Zwemer. Interestingly, he offered this definition of animism. I quote, "Animism is the belief that a great part, if not all, of the inanimate kingdom of nature, as well as all animated beings, are endowed with reason, intelligence, and volition identical with them." Another theory of the time considers the belief to be a sort of totemism. As an example, William Robertson Smith held that the jnûn were a sort of survival from an early totemic state of the Bedouins in Arabia. Thus, the various jinn clans would originally have represented animal species, each having a special relationship with a given clan or tribe. On the contrary, Edward Westermarck, who really put his work into dialogue with what Robertson Smith had previously stated, wrote many lines against these totemic conceptions of the jnûn. As it refers to Jbala Bromara, I would say that the jnûn are very fundamental beings in experiences with alterity of many men and women. Sometimes they are called very significantly the others, lachrin, and their existence is defined by taking into account their subjective and material bodily characteristics, but especially their interactions with humans, defined as al-insan, with this Islamic term. It is important to have in mind that the jnûn are not human and that their existence confronts us with the primordial distinction between humans and non-humans. Of course, there are the animals and the angels alike, but I'm not focusing really on them. All major healing practices would take place at shrines, but not only. And despite this being a topic of research so much related to space, I'm sorry that I will not further develop it into this talk. What I would like to do today is to focus really on the modes of existence and more precisely on modes of identification. In Par de la nature et culture, the French anthropologist Philippe Descola analyzes the modes of relationship between existent beings, what he called existants, and establishes that there are two modalities of structuring the individual and collective experience: identification and relationship. And one of the modes of identification conceived by the scholar, animism, is an ontology that implies the existence of a physical discontinuity between all beings in what he calls physicality, the physicality, and a metaphysic continuity in what he calls interiority. If we consider what the scholar points out about animism, we will see that our Moroccan interlocutors established a physical discontinuity, between humans and jnûn, and that it is also interesting to know that this is not only because these beings were created from different matter, and here it would be always mentioned the Quranic cosmology, but also to the fact that the jnûn are invisible beings, not perceptible through the human senses. On the contrary, we will also see that they establish a metaphysical continuity between humans and jnûn. Both are gifted beings and on other common attributes, endowed with intelligence or understanding, aql, and with will and with intentionality. In his article, The Nature of the Arab Gene, illustrated by the present beliefs of the people of Morocco, published in 1899, Edward Westermarck observed how the belief in the jnûn was very significant for the Moroccans, Arabs and Berbers alike, or Arabophones and Berberphones alike. And he showed how it pervaded all classes, and I quote, "Though some of the more enlightened Moors are inclined to represent it as a superstition of the ignorant, the common people spoke of the jnûn as unreservedly as of men and women, and do not hesitate to claim a personal acquaintance with them." This article is the first work in which Westermarck offers a theory of the inhabited space of the jnûn. In Westermarck's words, I quote, "The jnûn may be met with anywhere, but certain places are especially haunted, mashkounin. At Tangier, they have their very favorite abode on the seashore. At Fez, in an old fort. At Marrakech, their sultans assemble in the big well called El Bir al-Haddad. At Tetuan, in the spring El Canal Clear. They inhabit rivers, boats, the sea, ruins, houses, and particularly springs and drains and caves and other underground places. Their native country is below the surface of the earth. They have the villages and towns and live in tribes and nations, each of which has its sultan. But they are not tied down to any particular spot, and sometimes they travel great distances. They are constantly coming forth to the upper world, more especially when it's dark. Hence, a Moor's fear of the jinn practically commences with the twilight. There are streets in which he will not venture to walk at night, and houses which are inhabited because nobody dares to sleep in them. In Marrakech, I heard of a man who moved out from his house regularly every night. Most Moors are afraid of sleeping alone in a room, especially if the door be left open, and to sleep in a stairway is regarded as particularly dangerous. It would require still greater courage to pay a nocturnal visit to a place where cattle are slaughtered, as the jnûn have a special predilection for places where there is blood. As soon as it gets dark, too, a Moor will carefully abstain from pouring out hot water in the ground." This theory, or more developed through many ethnographic vignettes, is further developed in his major work in Ritual and Belief in Morocco in 1926, where he offers much more examples and these very characteristic ethnographic short paragraphs with raw materials that really are the contents of his work. Jbalans and Romarans offer very consistent definitions of the jnûn's natures and doings. I'm just going to show you some slides of people working daily so as to maybe make you place yourselves in daily lives and to focus on daily interactions. The men and women that I have interviewed in Jebel and Gomara stress that the jnûn live with humans, that they are to be found anywhere and everywhere, and that at any moment they can cause some harm to people. The jnûn are disembodied and invisible beings, but can acquire a human or animal body, and thus become visible beings. And this invisibility-visibility divide is of a clear predicament. According to the narratives that I have gathered among the Ghazawa, the jnûn become mainly men, women, dogs, donkeys, goats, calves, and cats. But not only. The jnûn are said to be able to penetrate the human bodies, taking control of some of its functions, both voice and the ability to speak, bodily movements or the ability to move, and both the intellect and human understanding. The ethnographic data refer to spaces where there is water, and I go back to the example of the water cellar. In Ahwalu, a village of the fraction Beni Shaif of the tribe of Zawa, women speak of the existence of two marshes, the Marja Bu Amel and the Marja Zina. These are spaces where there is water. I mean, you can imagine that this is a dry region, especially in the summer, but not in winter. In February, March, it rains a lot indeed. And according to my interlocutors, they do not dwell in both places because they are very fond of the places where there's water. Maybe as humans. Those who walk near these lacunae or take their animals to drink to them are supposed to be in touch by the jnûn. And as you can see here, also there is toponymy, which is rather interesting, naming spaces where the jnûn are said to live. And if you have gone through the readings that I recommended to you, maybe you remember when Josep Luis Mateo Dieste, my colleague from the University of Barcelona, says that some people in Asylum would stress that Holland is a country inhabited by jnûn because of the amount of water that the Moroccans who have traveled to Holland perceive there. So it's considered to be a very haunted country. I said this for my Dutch colleagues. As I said, interactions with the jnûn are highly specialized. In the Jubalan villages, women, for example, spit salt in the four corners of their houses, and sometimes you can see the salt placed at the four corners of the houses, or also in the thresholds of the rooms in order to protect these spaces, because normally prophylactic measures are related to with the things that the humans think that the genes like or don't like or dislike. Westermark explained also rituals similar to this, that in the Jbalan Qabila of Anjara, when a house was going to be built, men, not women, put salt with and an egg under the soil, and a goat is sacrificed in the threshold of the house, and he stresses that the salt is there in order to protect the house from the jnûn. In the Jbalan and Qumanan social world, the jnûn resemble human beings in many various aspects. They may speak through their human hosts, or one may hear them as voices which are not easy to be understood. Sometimes one may see them because they assume the shape of humans or animals and appear to individuals. But most of my interlocutors, as I said before, stress that they are anywhere and everywhere. Evidently, as they are mostly taken for invisible beings or disembodied beings, humans lack certainty about their exact location, and they can only try to infer who they are and where are they found, paying some attention to certain signs of their presence. Also, it is very interesting to notice that humans accumulate knowledge on their spatial location, as in the case of the water cellar's bell, which is really taken as a sound which for some may indicate, may warn of where the jnûn might be in the market. The jnûn, as I said, also can inhabit very different sorts of places, including human dwellings. In the Jbala, it is also quite usual to salute the jnûn when one is entering an alien house or an inhabited house or simply a room. It is a gesture that I have been able to observe in many different occasions and that I have performed in many, many different occasions. Usually the person speaks out loud the phrase Assalamu alaikum, and these words are uttered when one opens the door and enters the room. In its meaning, peace be upon you, as one of my interlocutors explained to me, we can see the will of the human to be in peace with all beings, and this formula might be used after the pronunciation of the Basmala, and it's not often replaced. First, one enters the place in the name of God, and after them, peace is desired upon the jnûn, and who may be at the moment in the place. And people use this formula to greet jnûn because they normally assume the idea that they coexist with the jnûn and they are co-inhabiting places with and spaces with the jnûn. Indeed, the jnûn are frequently considered to be the masters of the house, mu'allim dar, the lords of the house, the masters of the house. And by the way, this is very interesting because it's the same name which is given to the human owners of the house, mu'allim dar. And moreover, in the Jbalan highlands, it is frequently an euphemistic formula to address married women. It's used in plural, mu'allim dar, to refer to the wife of a man, the man of the house. Westermarck also indicates a formula that is pronounced when the light is turned on, in a room of the house. Mashal khair alaykum jan mu'allim al-maqam. Good night to you, all masters of the place. The possible presence of the jnûn makes certain prohibitions of a special significance. For example, spilling hot water on the ground after the time of the Maghrib. Various other names are also given to these spirits. Indeed, the great variety of names given to them is frequently explained by the fear of mentioning the jnûn by the proper name, especially in precise moments of the day. For example, after the Asha prayer in the afternoon, where they are supposed to come to the surface of the earth from their subterranean homes. To pronounce their name would be to summon them, and this is something that bibliography stresses and that I myself stressed in my PhD thesis. But then, as I want to transmit you today, these terms also speak of the modes of inhabiting and the modes of existence or the modes of dwelling of the jnûn indeed. According to Westermarck, Moroccans use these euphemistic words like the aforementioned, for example, Muluk, the owners of masters, Sadatna, or lords, Mu'allim al-Ard, masters of the ground, to refer to them for fear not to be harmed. This is the current explanation. But indeed, these names reveal more. I think that these names reveal a local spatial theory. For example, Mohammed Maruf, the author of the book on gene eviction at the sanctuary of Ben-Yefu, also expresses that these descendants of Ben-Yefu, well known as healers of the jnûn, used the expression Sukan al-Ama, occupying dwellers, Mu'allim Nuba, the masters of the term, stressing also in his words the danger of calling them by their proper name, the jnûn. I think, as I said, that things would be a little bit more complex. A general term, thus, for the jnûn is also this term al-muluk, the owners, which refers indeed to the mastery of certain spaces, because as you probably know, the milk is a master of a property, of a lot of land, of cattle, of persons alike. And in the case of the jnûn, this is the master of the body it haunts, primarily, but also of the places and spaces it occupies or it inhabits. And another term connected with this idea is the aforementioned Mu'allim, masters of the ground, and many others. For example, in the city of Fez, if we go back again to Western Marx materials, he registered another spatially marked term, "Dukh nas taht al-ard," those people who are below the ground, which refers indeed to this subterranean character which is attributed to their dwelling places. Indeed, many of my interlocutors consider that the most frequent spatial location of the jnûn would be under the ground. Nevertheless, some of them are said to live in the air, between the earth and the skies, or at least to rise there from their subterranean dwellings. And interestingly also, sometimes my interlocutors do not consider them to be tied down to any spatial place. And indeed, what they stress is that the jnûn are able to travel great distances and travel very fast. And they stress also that in their own physicality, not embodied in the bodies of humans or animals, the jnûn might travel in a certain specific way and might be able also to enter the room even with the door closed, etc. So they normally also talk a lot about this kind of non-human mobilities which are really proper to these beings. Well, I'm going to speak also a little bit about invisibility. And of something that usually emerges when talking about the jnûn, and the interlocutors might very frequently say that they see us but we do not see them, and stress their invisible condition, and at least we don't see them in their own physicality or materiality, in their original physiognomy, which is not perceptible for human beings. And in these local understandings of the jnûn, they are said not to have bodies and thus presented frequently as immaterial beings, or also many people adhere to Quranic explanations mentioning fire or hot dust, with many different ways of addressing their physicality. But basically they would stress that they are social beings often capable of assuming human or animal form and exercising a sort of very specific influence over humans and non-humans alike. And are thought also capable of dwelling in all conceivable inanimate objects, such as stones and rocks. Also, and this stems from some field work we did together with a group of dialectologists in 2014 in the Kabila of Anjara and in the areas of Homara. Many people would stress that animals perceive the jnûn far more better than humans do. And animals sometimes see these jnûn which are not seen by men. And they would tell us some experiences with cows which suddenly stop and seem to be fearing something, or cattle that moves at night in their stables without any clear explanation of what might be happening, and this is frequently attributed to the presence of a gene that it's not perceptible, a gene or a genia, because I forgot to say that these are very gendered non-human beings. In the means of appearing before humans, we have to mention both metamorphosis and possessions, or mastery of beings. On the one hand, the jinn can take the shape he wants to take, as I said, but on the other hand, he can take hold of the body of another being. Thank you. As it refers to interspecific relations, I would like to explain something which is not a local theory, something which is the way of addressing a speciality from the anthropological point of view, which is a very interesting spatial theory which the French anthropologist Romain Simenel has proposed in relation to this taking hold of alien bodies. He explains that very frequently the experience with the jnûn stems from a casual or accidental encounter with animals considered to be haram, illicit for human consumption from the point of view of the fiqh, and who in that moment happen to be out of place or out of the place that humans assign to them. And it is basically a living being which is not in its right place. And thus, he might be subverting social and spatial order. Simenel offers very different examples. For example, a snake or a scorpion found around the house, a cat, a fox, or a jackal which is standing still at the crossroads or in the middle of a field, an erratic donkey which is at the cemetery or at the garden, an owl or a bat which appears in full light during the daytime, the reflect of two eyes in the dark of the night in the middle of an horticultural area, or a man encountered in the middle of nowhere. All these untimely appearances are generally interpreted as a manifestation of the jnûn. Thus, the references to the jnûn, in his opinion, appear frequently when a human finds himself confronted with a non-human being, which is part of his environment, but who is not in its assigned place. And Simenel stresses how this spatial theory concerns humans and non-humans alike, particularly men, women, jnûn, and animals. In experiences that he has considered among the Aitba Amran of the south of Morocco, this casual or accidental encounter between the human and the jinn leaves a physical or body sequelae in the human being. In order to make sense of these sequelae, which are linked to this interspecific relationship involuntarily established, the Aitba Amram affirmed that the jinn has casted the evil eye on the human. But also humans can be out of place. And let me offer you an ethnographic microscene, which is quite gendered, in my opinion. One of my interlocutors from Ghazawa, an old woman, referred to me what happened to her father, who was a very well-known faqih of the tribe. And it was dark when he left the mosque, and he met a woman standing behind the walls of the village mosque. And this woman happened to be a jinniya, in his words, that slapped his face with the strength and pushed him a few meters away. And when he stood up, the woman had disappeared. And then when he returned home, he told the family what had happened, and he told a lot of people in the village what had happened. And my interlocutor implied that his father had lost a little bit of his legitimacy as a faqih of the village as a result of this strange encounter with the jinniya, which I was a little bit surprised to hear, and which I cannot really understand quite properly, yes, I must confess. And as I have tried to, I'm going to make a short reference to the readings if I have 2 minutes. I have in the articles that I recommended to do, the jnûn becomes a host, and humans exert hospitality according to certain norms. And maybe you read it, and you've been, well, these are some Jubalan villages. And the city of Wasan, where I had extensive fieldwork also. Well, this is the article I'm talking to you about. But more interestingly, maybe you have been able to read about what my colleague Josep Luis Mateo Dieste writes about forms of spatiality when the jnûn are taken to be as microbes, and informants stressed a lot to the permeability of the human body, and also these healing processes that are very interesting and which I have really neglected in this talk that I have offered to you, because as I said before, my interest today was focusing more on modes of existence, dwelling, and identification of the jnûn. Thank you very much.